Marvel and DC Chaos, Dumbledore Powers Unleashed Across Universes. Episode 91. Even though it was already a Heavenly Father-level strength, Russell was still very excited at this time. After all, the best before was only the Purple Epic, and the Golden Legend was the first time. Although this character is not familiar to him, it seems to be a mage-type character in terms of appearance, which is quite his heart. Turn on simulation. Only the remaining 200 exchange points suddenly consumed 100 again. This simulation begins. Your name is Go Suzuki. And in the World Tree game, you are the guild leader of the guild Ainju-kyo. On the last day of the end of the World Tree's operations, you traveled to another world with the guild stronghold Nazalic Underground Tomb. You inherited all of your character's powers and items. The NPCs in the guild stronghold have self-awareness and become real life. You changed your name to Enzolgong and want to find a past partner. You saved Carl Village and captured all the members of the Sunshine Festival. You disguise an adventurer, increase your reputation, and subdue the Sage King of the Deep Forest. You have shattered Chironong's conspiracy and raised the adventurer level to Mithril level. You kill Shatia Bradflynn to release her mind control from the world-class prop allure, and resurrect her with 500 million gold coins. You have established the Demon Guidance Kingdom on Earth. You killed the Platinum Dragon King and the Desperate Death, and ruled the area where Nazalic is now. After the first simulation, Russell let out a long breath. He was both a little surprised at this time, but also a little bit of pity. The surprise is that the other party is a dead great magician, ruler of death, necromancer, eclipse, level 100 occupation, as well as the undead. Once these simulations are complete, all the more than 700 magic spells carried by its class will be obtained, and the power of the undead will also be obtained. In particular, the eclipse death is the end of all life, combined with the death spell of the necromancy system. The effect is terrifying. It's not powerful. Unfortunately, this product turned out to be a game character traveling through another world. He can only magic, but has very little knowledge of magic. However, he is still very content. After all, the difference between magic in his hands and in the hands of the original owner of the character is still very big. And the super magic in his hands is not only used once a day, but random. At this moment, the system's prompt sounded. Friendly reminder, the Golden Legend character card itself has items that can be exchanged after 100% simulation. Hearing this, Russell suddenly became excited. He was actually a little confused just now. In addition to the very large number of magic, Enzolgong's strength is not much stronger than Medivan. Why is it a 1-star legend card? It turns out that the Golden Legend still has this layer of benefits. With the memory of the Bone King, Russell knew that the other party's Tao was perverted. For example, a world-class prop star ring that can make a wish to a certain extent. The Hellish Abyss of the strongest destruction against matter. The Ainzier Staff that seals several super-level magics and more. Non-world-class items, while not as powerful, are also good items. Anyway, after opening, Russell can exchange it whenever he wants, and there is no mandatory requirement if he doesn't want to. At this moment, the system continues to sound. The simulation degree of Enzolgong this time is 1%, power loading, mana 1%, magic, dragon thunder, night vision, bright correction, blind resistance, minor injuries treatment, plant entanglement, burst, summon the succubus. With magic and skills fully under control, Russell opened his eyes with a strange expression on his face. First of all, magic. 1% of the Bone King is about 3% of Medivan, which is not bad. Then there is magic. Just 1%. There are 8 truths that are a bit exaggerated, and the other party is worthy of walking magic. However, it is also an exaggeration to simulate a progress of only 1%. This means that it takes 10,000 redemptions for him to completely unlock this character card. But what makes Russell show a weird look is the last magic. Summon the succubus. This is not to summon a hellish succubus casually, but to summon the purest succubus after being changed by the flying squirrel, Yalbed. Gain 100% loyalty and affection. Unfortunately, this skill requires Russell to fully simulate the Bone Queen to use, and now he can only watch. Russell sighed regretfully and simulated the last 100 points. This time in addition to 1% mana, magic includes Portal, Spot, Magic Arrow, Heart Mastery, Hellfire, Paralysis, Confuse Humans, and Advanced Elimination. Among them, the current level is 10 ranks, which is an incomparably powerful single-attack magic similar to space slashing. Almost nothing can be chopped. Russell stayed in Cairo for the next few days. Just when he thought that perhaps Mephisto had told the truth, he felt a slight fluctuation. Under the moon like a hook, a bloodied mercenary struggles to maintain the last shred of will and crawls towards the Egyptian temple that appears in front of him. At this time, the moonlight shone through the shattered dome and fell at the feet of a statue of a crow-faced man holding a huge scepter. Mark slowly crawled to the moonlight and slowly raised his pistol to his chin. He didn't want to shed blood and die powerlessly, so he might as well give himself a pain. Suddenly, a hoarse voice sounded in the empty temple. What a waste of life. Mark's drowsy brain woke up at once. Then the voice seduced. I can feel the pain in your heart and know that you don't want to fall into the vortex of death. And I'm looking for a fighter. Do what I do, see what I see, judge all evil men on my behalf, and destroy those who deserve it. Warrior? Mark first laughed when he heard the word, and then said with difficulty, "Who are you again?" The mysterious voice suddenly became solemn and solemnly said, "I am Luna Kongsu, so your choice is death or life." Mark was unable to fall, his eyes were full of confusion, and he seemed to not know how to choose. Seeing this, Kongsu calmly continued, "Your heart is shattered, but so charming. I think you have the qualifications to serve me. Now, are you willing to swear to protect the nocturnal travelers and avenge me against those who hurt them?" Mark looked at the blood in his hand and suddenly felt that maybe he was such a person. A killer. Case. "I do." As the voice fell, Mark was pulled up by a mysterious force. The moonlight lit up his eyes, the gray bandage wrapped around his body, the hooded robe draped over him, and the power of the moonlight surged in his body. At this moment, the Moonlight Knight was born. And at this moment, a burst of applause sounded and smashed into the temple, seemingly applauding Mark's transformation. But the next moment, a voice with curiosity and regret sounded. "Lunar God Kongsu, can you tell me what happened in the Egyptian god realm? Why is your strength so weak? It's really disappointing." Episode 92. Moonlight Knight Mark followed the voice and looked towards the temple door. At this time, his eyesight is not the same as before. Under the moonlight, he clearly saw a young man dressed as a tourist, eating melon, casually leaning against the doorpost, as if the other party had been there from the beginning. But how is that possible? He crawled all the way without even a single creature. At this moment, a gray fog suddenly appeared in front of his eyes, rolling into a tall figure holding a moonlight scepter and a dry bone bird's head. Luna Kongsu. Mark instinctively knew who it was, but what he couldn't understand was that at this time, he could feel Kongsu's emotions at this time extremely turbulent and uneasy, as if this Egyptian goddess fear a human being. Marco was taken aback by his own thoughts for a moment. How is this possible? Syllable. Russell casually threw the melon skin in the temple, and then squinted. "Are you really the moon god? Why does it look as miserable as a candle in the wind?" Although he had seen the trailer of Moonlight Knight before crossing over, he had not seen the specific episode and did not know much information. And right now, in his eyes, Kongsu's power is too unstable and too weak. It would be too disappointing for the Egyptian gods to be at this level, and he didn't need his personal attention at all. Hearing this, Kongsu held the scepter tightly. He was angry, but he was terrified. Ever since the ride betrayed him last month, he had been careful to hide in the shadows. It wasn't until he learned the news of Gui's death that he chose another one. But I didn't expect that just after giving the power and having a new moon ride, an uninvited guest came to the door. What frightened him even more was that he didn't even find that the other party had been under his eyelids from beginning to end, and he was almost as confused as the human Mark. Gui is dead. Why are there such powerful humans? This is unreasonable. Just then, the voice sounded again. Weren't you still quite able to say it just now? Why are you speechless now? Saying that, Russell narrowed his eyes slightly, with a hint of coldness in his smile. But for the sake of the oath just now, I can give you one last chance. Luna Kongsu, tell me why? Hearing this, Mark's heart was cold. The more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. I thought I hugged my thigh, but now my thigh seems to be beaten to death in the next second. Just when Mark thought about taking off his clothes now, Kongsu finally spoke. In a hoarse voice, he said indignantly, "I was expelled from the realm of Hierapolis by them, and now the power of authority is gone." Russell nodded and asked, "So what's the reason?" Kongsu suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly. "Although I am not one of those good gods, I do not think that human beings are just lambs of faith, and that souls are oppressed after death. The lord of the underworld, Osiris, was dissatisfied with me for a long time, and finally expelled me through the upper 9-pillar god review. But if I want to say that they are just a group of hypocritical cowards, they are not so frightened by Gui that they never dare to come to the world, and only let a few human agents secretly collect faith." Russell thought slightly, and then suddenly smiled. "I think maybe we can have some cooperation." Saying that, Russell no longer leaned on the stone pillar, stood up straight and stepped step by step. As you walk, golden sparks spread upwards from under your feet, and the casual clothes dressed by tourists turned into black and gold patterned battle uniforms. Russell walked up to Kongsu and raised his palm. "Get to know each other again. In the next new Karmatage Supreme Mage, you can call me Master Russell. I seem to smell that some gods are about to suffer a big loss, but I like it." Feeling the terrifying aura of the new Supreme Mage in front of him, Kongsu also stretched out his bandaged palm. One of the 9-pillar gods of Opolis, the moon god, Kongsu. And in the rear, seeing the two bigwigs who seemed to have reached an agreement that didn't know what to do with just 2 sentences, Mark felt that he was completely numb. Just pray that you don't just get silenced once and then get silenced again. At noon, the sun is high. At the top of a pyramid, Russell raised his hand. In the next second, Kongsu nodded, holding up the lunar god scepter to touch the sky authority. In an instant, it was like a Tengu food day. The sunlight is rapidly blocked by unknown forces, leaving only a trace of the edge of the crescent. Bang! An invisible force descended, and a stone gate rose at the top of the pyramid. Kongsu was not surprised by this, pushed open the door and walked in. This is the interior of the Great Pyramid of Giza, where 9 golden idols surround the hall and gaze into the center. Kongsu stood in the center and waited quietly. A moment later, the sound of stone doors being pushed open sounded, followed by several footsteps. They are the agents of Hades, the god of fertility, Horus, the patron saint of pharaohs, and the god of love and music. Seeing this, Kongsu snorted coldly in his heart. He knew no more people would come. Behind these 4 agents in front of him, Hades and the god of fertility are husband and wife. And Horus is the son of Hades, and the god of love and music is the wife of Horus. What's even more ridiculous is that the latter 2 are not 9-pillar gods at all. As the 4 agents sat down, Hades' agent suddenly raised his head, and a divine power light appeared in his eyes. In the next second, an inexplicable will descended, and a majestic voice sounded. Lunar god Kongsu, you violated the divine law by manipulating the sky without authorization. Are you guilty? Kongsu snorted coldly. I control the sky because I have important news to transmit to the gods. Why are only a few of you here? The god of the underworld sneered and did not answer, but said strongly, you can say information. If I find out you're fooling me, I'll punish you for the sun god. Kongsu showed anger and stared at the god of the underworld, but after a few seconds, he suddenly became weak, as if resigned. The supreme mage is dead. I want to return to the god realm. Hades did not speak, as if thinking about something. After a few seconds, he shook his head. You have been deceived. Dewey will definitely not die easily, and you should stay on Earth. When the words fell, the will of the god of the underworld left directly, and the 4 agents walked away directly without looking back. A few seconds later, Kongsu also returned to the top of the pyramid through the stone gate. How? Russell asked while sipping the cold drink he had just bought. Kongsu suddenly let out a dark laugh. Although Hades directly denied it, I know that his heart is definitely shaken. Russell nodded. It was the same as he thought. The Egyptian gods, who had received the information that Gui was dead, would definitely be even more shaken in their hearts after hearing Kongsu's feedback. It's just that 2,000 years ago, they fought too hard, so that this group of gods was still afraid. However, Russell believes that as long as there is another fire, the other party will definitely believe it completely, then continue according to the plan. Next it's time for me to perform. Russell's body fell towards the pyramid, and then the entanglement disappeared in an instant. In London, a community where people of all races work together in harmony. I don't know when, a person hurriedly ran inside, and did not stop until he met a thin man with a cane. After a few words, the caller hurried back. Not long after, he walked in with a man in a black cloak and hood. You are Arthur Harrow? The person who came bowed slightly and asked in a very unpolite tone. Arthur didn't care, looking at the young man in front of him and nodding gently. The young man continued, I came to save Ammit. Arthur smiled and walked over to the young man, placing his cane between his arms and holding each other's hands. Then he spoke gently, no rush, for the sinful are not qualified to save Ammit. In the next second, the cane suddenly swayed under the unknown force, and on Arthur's arm a black tattoo scale suddenly seemed to come to life, and began to swing from side to side as if weighing something. But after a few seconds, the smile on Arthur's face faded and became more and more solemn, until there was a hint of fear, just because the balance swayed faster and faster, and finally it seemed like a sound of shattering. The balance tattoo broke in half from the middle. Harrow fell back in horror and fell to the ground. He raised his head and looked at the person in front of him with shock in his eyes, and said in horror, Impossible, who the hell are you? Russell slowly lifted his hood and said condescendingly, I am the god of the underworld Osiris, who are you qualified to judge me? Now, kneel. Episode 93. In an instant, a rich and gloomy aura of death emanated, and the Ammit believers in the entire community suddenly turned pale, trembling and unable to move. At this moment, they felt as if they had fallen into icy water, and their souls were sinking little by little. There is a feeling that you will die at any moment, and Arthur, who was facing Russell, had nothing else in his vision at this time. He could only see a huge shadow of death shrouding him, wanting to devour his life. Is this the power of Ammit, the power of Osiris? Just human agents are so terrible. Arthur did not resist at all, lowered his head and knelt down on one knee, and said with a respectful face, I don't know what the Lord of the Underworld commands. Russell withdrew the necromancy power from the Bone King, and said in a serious voice, The world is about to change. Lord Hades wants me to help you liberate Ammit. He is waiting for the return of the Devourer. Arthur Harrow suddenly showed a surprised expression. Praise the god of Hades. After a pause, he tried to ask, I don't know what has changed in the world. As far as I know, the gods do not interfere with the world. Russell didn't speak, his eyes didn't blink. Arthur, who was looking straight at him, lowered his head again in a cold sweat before he said coldly, The powerful guardians of the world are dead, and the gods are about to return. I will receive eternal life in the light of God. Arthur crawled on the ground in excitement and said reverently again, Praise to the gods. In an ancient town under the Alps, a group of armed men dressed as mercenaries are gradually searching. Arthur Harrow has been planning for a long time, and through a large number of documents, it is located that the golden scarab is here. It wasn't until 3 days later that the scarab, which was the key, was found from a tomb. This is a key that can guide everyone to the place of Ammit's seal. However, Russell was a little surprised, because in addition to feeling the power of Kongsu in this thing, there was also a trace of the power of time. It's clear that this stuff isn't just as simple as it seems. Russell took this thing into his own hands, and Arthur Harrow had no problem with it. That night, following the guidance of the scarab, everyone had already arrived at Iseo. After a simple assembly, the convoy marched smoothly through the desert. Suddenly, a moonlight scattered through the clouds, as if covering the desert with a layer of white frost. A figure covered in bandages and moonlit eyes standing on the path. Inside the off-road vehicle, Arthur looked at the familiar outfit that was getting closer and closer, and said with a solemn face, "He's coming." As the previous moonlight night, he knew how powerful the other party was. Power, flight, super healing. This is his biggest enemy to unseal Ammit. But at this moment, he heard a flat voice in his ears. "It's okay, the mantis is just blocking the car." The next moment, the vehicle shook violently. Arthur watched in shock as Russell's black armor easily broke through the roof of the car, jumped high in the moonlight, and raised his black cloak to crash into the moonlight night. On the ground, Mark, who could not pretend to be forced for more than 2 seconds, looked at Russell in the sky wearing hideous battle armor and fell through the air, and almost pulled his legs and ran. Previously, he asked Kong Su what he should do this time. The latter is just merciful. He is responsible for doing his best. Well, is responsible for all-out defense, to prevent himself from being killed. Rumble. The sand waves surged around, all the vehicles had to stop, and everyone got out of the car to defend and look ahead in shock. The next moment, another muffled voice sounded. The moonlight knight hunched his body and flew uncontrollably into the sky. Everyone can see that this is being blasted from below. Just when everyone's hearts were shocked, the ground trembled, and a pitch-black shadow jumped up from the ground to catch up with the moonlight knight who soared into the air. There was a cloud of pitch-black energy in his palm, and it slammed towards the chest of the Moonrider. In an instant, the moonlight seemed to brighten a little. The double blades on the chest of the moonlight knight surged the power of the moon god, blooming silver light. Two completely different forces collided violently in an instant, forming a clear boundary of black and white, constantly fighting each other. "Your power is too wasteful to use." With a cold snort, the black power suddenly split into black tentacles in the next second, bending out huge arcs one after another, as if forming a birdcage and falling from above. Rumble. A violent black explosion was generated, and the bandages of the Moonlight Knight's whole body became tattered and flew out, tumbling on the ground. In the next second, Ammit's disciples saw the Moonlight Knight staggering up, and then stretched out his cloak and fled away. In the sky, Mark saw that Russell did not chase over, and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He originally thought that he could pass the trick and resist a little. The result is a complete beating. I didn't last for 30 seconds, and the Luna power that erupted in midair before was not made by him at all, but Russell. The specific reason he doesn't know how the other party did it. He can only say that the big guy is terrifying. On the ground, as Russell walked back, Ammit's followers cheered. "This kind of big win is very morale boosting," Arthur said very respectfully. "Thanks to the divine envoy's hand, the knight of the moon god Kong Su is really vulnerable in the hands of your excellency." He knew the strength of the Moonlight Knight, but he didn't expect that the other party didn't have the power to fight back. Arthur can be sure that the person in front of him must have received more power rewards from the gods of the underworld. In the future, when the gods return, the other party's status will most likely be higher than their own. Soon, the convoy continued to march and found Ammit's sealed place in the early hours of the morning. After Russell killed a few tomb-guarding mummies at random, he successfully found Ammit's sealed statue in Alexander the Great's tomb. Harrow had wanted to go back to the Great Pyramid of Giza to unseal Ammit, but Russell told me that you don't need to bother so much. Russell took the sealed statue and threw it hard under his feet, and in an instant, a large amount of purple divine power surged. A few seconds later, a humanoid creature with a crocodile head, long braids, and a golden armor dress appeared. In an instant, everyone except Russell fell to their knees. Ammit looked at Russell coldly, and there was no gratitude in his eyes that was liberated, but very dissatisfied. "As a human being, why don't you kneel when you see God?" Ammit said in a judgmental tone. Russell smiled softly. "I have come in the name of Lord Osiris, and I have a divine order to explain to you." Ammit was stunned for a moment, but didn't seem so happy. "Back then, he was also one of the gods who sealed me. Why do you think I will obey?" Russell knew the reason from the moon god, knowing that Ammit was chased and killed by Gui and fled back to the god realm because he devoured mortal souls, and the god of the underworld had no choice but to choose to seal. Russell smiled indifferently. "The news of Gui's death has spread throughout the multiverse, and now it's time for you to show your divine power and show your return." Ammit immediately understood that the god of the underworld was afraid that Gui was not dead, and let himself explore the way. It seems that today's things have to be done if they are not done, otherwise they will still be sealed. However, if Gui really died, then he still had to return to the hands of the god of the underworld, and he would definitely get more benefits at that time. "Good." Ammit nodded, and the next moment the purple divine power erupted again, and the divine body became crazy and easily squeezed through the tomb, until it reached a height of 100 meters. The huge crocodile mouth was open, and the soul of the believer who was pressed into the tomb suddenly turned into a ray of light and was sucked into her abdomen. Heliopolis, God Realm, Tartarus. In the temple, a huge humanoid statue seemed to sense something. In the next second, it turned into a 5-meter tall human with blue skin, both with Pharaoh's crown and grey bandages on its limbs in a tremble. Ammit actually broke through the seal and unleashed all his power. Silently perceiving it again, a smile appeared on Osiris's face. Luna is right. Glory is revived, and the age of the gods has finally returned. Episode 94. In the desert, the gigantic Ammit obviously became more vigorous after replenishing dozens of fresh souls. Sealed for more than 2,000 years, she is too eager for the taste of the soul. The next moment, she continued to erupt with divine power without hesitation, and the purple aura began to spread outward. She's going to eat more souls. At this moment, the moonlight burst out even brighter again. The moon god Kongsu has arrived. He unleashed all the divine power accumulated after his banishment and the power given by Russell, and his divine body grew rapidly to the same height as Ammit. Ammit twisted his body and pumped at Kongsu with his huge crocodile tail, while shouting angrily, "Kongsu, you and I have no difference in what I expect from this world. Why do you always hinder me?" Kongsu's body turned into a streamer to avoid the attack, quickly condensed his body behind Ammit, and the moonlight scepter swept over. Like a muffled huge drum sound, Ammit was hit and fell to the ground. Kongsu pressed the scepter against the opponent's neck, and only then opened his mouth to respond. "You knowingly ask, I punish only those who commit sins." Ammit disagreed, loudly retorting, "Me too, except I won't give them a chance to commit evil. That's the real solution." Kongsu just sneered at this. "You are wrong, fate is never the only one, your divine right has exceeded. Die, sophist, you are only trying to satisfy your own desires." When the words fell, Kongsu held the moonlight scepter high, and the silver-white divine power surged on the sharp crescent blade and stabbed downwards hard. But at this moment, an illusory balance emerged in Ammit's huge vertical pupils. The next moment, there were no feathers, and the empty right tray quickly sank. Ammit's voice was solemn, and his expression solemnly made a judgment. "I said, you are guilty." In an instant, Kongsu felt the power of judgment descend to suppress his body, and his hands trembled and he could not drop the scepter, but at this time, his empty eyes burst into white light. The full moon in the sky was immediately echoed, condensing a pillar of light and falling on the body. In an instant, all the suppression on Kongsu's body disappeared, and the moonlight scepter whistled down. Bang! Huge sand waves splash, but Ammit has already fled. Before he attacked, he turned into countless small crocodiles and scattered, and then recondensed, not far away. For a while, the two fought together again. In the void, Russell looked calm and waited quietly. "Tartarus, Osiris summons his wife and son. That old woman Ngui is dead. I wait for the gods to reign all the land of the Nile again." He did not say anything else. He believes that in the case of Ngui's death, the Asa and Olympian gods, as well as the heavenly forces, subordinate to Ashitu, are also likely to return. It is not appropriate to cause conflict. As the patron saint of the pharaoh, Horus of the Eagle Head has long been impatient. Since the fall of Pharaoh's rule, his power of authority has been declining. If it weren't for his father's obstruction, he would have set out to the world the moment he learned the news. However, Isis, the god of fertility, did not agree. She believes that regardless of whether there is an ancient one or not, the gods should remain in the god realm, and should not rule believers with fear and reap the power of faith. Osiris, the god of the underworld, was a little displeased, and as a son Horus did not say anything. A moment later, the two gods walked in the direction of the Gate of Earth. The essence of the Heliopolis god realm is a small dimension attached to the earth. The supreme sun god Ra resides at the top and rules over the gods. In the middle live the god of the sky, the god of the earth, the god of the air, etc. The lowest level of Hades is ruled by Osiris, and the gate from dimension to earth is also at the bottom here. Likewise, it is also the gate for believers to enter the divine realm after death. Just a few seconds later, Osiris and Horus arrived at the gate. Tavret, the protective god of pregnant women and young children, drove the ship of the underworld and watched from not far away. It's a pity that she doesn't dare to care about the two superior gods, but her little ears are fluttering and she is obviously in a bad mood. Seeing that the two gods were about to ignore the rules and push open the gate, sunlight appeared in the icy sea of sand, dispelling the darkness. A sun disk on top of his head, an elderly man in a white robe appeared. Hades and Horus immediately bowed their heads, and the former said with a reverent look, "Supreme Ra, what are your orders?" Under the dazzling light, the sun god pulled out an old voice. "It is true that Furuchi is dead, but the outside world is becoming more and more complicated. I am born by faith, and strength is only an incidental thing. Why should I pursue it? It's better to stay in the god realm unless mankind perishes. I will wait forever." The god of the underworld suddenly asked a little nervously, "Rajan, is this an order?" The sun god shook his head. Seeing this, Hades and Horus lowered their heads, and the answer was self-evident. Seeing this, the sun god did not say anything more, and the sunlight left from the underworld. In the desert at night, after all, it is the moon god Kongsu who is better. Ammit the devourer fell to the ground, his body sealed by layers of moonlight. In the next second, Kongsu raised his scepter again, intending to kill his old enemy. Russell still didn't make a move. If he wants to catch bigger fish, he must put a long line and cannot be greedy for the power of Ammit in front of him. Originally, according to his previous idea, Ammit should attract the gods, with all his strength, to burst divine power. But even if it doesn't come out, it doesn't hurt, let Kong Su beat the other party to death. This is still a backhand, which can make the gods understand that Gui is really gone. Just when Kong Su was about to drop the scepter, a strong fluctuation suddenly appeared in the sky. In the next second, a huge door made of yellow rock, carved with countless hieroglyphs, formed in the sky. With a tremor, the gate slowly opened to the sides. A coercive voice, mixed with anger, sounded from inside. Kong Su, you are a waste expelled from the god realm. Who gave you the audacity to attack my gods? The figure was not seen, and a rich dark divine power tumbled out from the gate, quickly crashing into Kong Su's body. In an instant, Kong Su was blown out, and the bandages on his body showed traces of corrosion. At this time, Hades and Horus finally walked out of the huge door, and the gate behind them disappeared. Osiris didn't even look at the angry Kong Su, but hugged the sky with a fascinated face, and said to himself excitedly in his mouth, what a charming and familiar taste. Land, Nile, sweet fruit, real air. I, the great lord of the underworld, Osiris, have finally returned to earth and once again enjoyed the service of the believers. After taking another deep breath, Osiris opened his eyes and looked at Ammit, who was half kneeling on the ground and had retracted to normal size, and asked curiously, who helped you break through the seal? I didn't even sense it in the Hall of Gods in the Great Pyramid of Giza, but only after you burst out divine power. Hearing this, Ammit Crocodile had a thick doubt in his eyes. She looked up stunned. Great lord of the underworld, didn't you ask your human agent to help me break through? Osiris's curious eyes suddenly turned gloomy. When did he ever do such a thing? Someone impersonated his agent. Calculating yourself. Seeing the expression of the god of the underworld, Kong Su, the moon god who had just been extremely angry on the earth, suddenly burst into laughter. Horus, who had already sensed that something was wrong, shouted, what are you laughing at, waste? Kong Su did not answer, but a faint voice appeared in midair. Russell stepped out of the air and looked at Hades and Horus with a smile. I think he might be laughing at you two, really stupid, right? After all, so many gods, only the two of you are impatient to come out. The words fell, and countless mirrors shattered at the same time. Mirror space, instant formation, episode 95. Syllable. Russell raised his palm and slapped it gently. In an instant, everything in the mirror space is changing. Meteorites fall, the sun rises. In the blink of an eye, night turns to noon. The roar continues to sound. The great pyramids and temples of Gu-Esa have risen one after another. The waters of the Nile are rolling in from afar. Oases by the river are full of melons and fruits. In just a dozen seconds, time seemed to go back to the era thousands of years ago, when the gods could enter the world at will to rule believers. Russell clasped his hands and smiled. How about it, great Lord Hades? I'm very intimate, so that you can die in the place of your dreams. Osiris looked at everything familiar in front of him with a gloomy look, although he was a little surprised, but he was not afraid. Although this mirror space spell was used by the other party very skillfully, it even made him recall a trace of fear in the past. But the other party is not Gui. How many tens of thousands of years has Karmatage been passed down? Only Gui alone can completely drive the gods back to the Heliopolis god realm. The other party is just a new successor to a supreme mage. Osiris raised his head slightly, his eyes were contemptuous, and his voice was arrogant. Foolish blasphemer, Dai handed over Karmatage to you, but you want to take it to destruction. Do you think that if you win over the moon god Kong Su, you will have the victory? Osiris sneered. Even if he is in his heyday, you are only 2 against 3. And you have no advantage at all. What's more, he's just a waste now. At this time, he had lifted Ammit's moonlight seal, and the other party was standing behind him. But at this moment, the moon god Kong Su laughed as if he had heard some joke, and his voice was full of ridicule. Seeing this, Horus snorted coldly. It seems that you are not stupid and have found help, but that is only in vain. Under the great power of the god of the underworld, all the intrigues and tricks from the enemy are nothing but self-destruction. For his father, he has absolute confidence. After all, that is the existence second only to the sun god and the sky god. But then he saw the human laugh. Russell lifted a finger and shook it gently. You misunderstood Kong Su, we don't have a helper. He's just laughing at you guys for getting one thing wrong. Russell showed a smile, and a finger paused in midair extremely conspicuously, and slowly said, today is not 2 on 3, rather. I'll hit all 3 of you one by one. The air suddenly quieted down. In the next second, there was a rage in Horus's eagle eyes. Arrogant, he held the Voss scepter and pointed forward, and suddenly a bursting energy ray shot out through the void. Russell looked calm and did not move. A purple magic array formed out of thin air and slowly rotated, easily blocking a steady stream of energy rays. It's really rude. Russell's finger flicked forward, and suddenly, the runes inside the purple magic array rapidly deformed and twisted. Magic and spell countermeasures. The next moment, the magic array suddenly lit up and rotated sharply, and the bursting energy rays were suddenly reflected back. The faces of the 3 gods standing together suddenly changed slightly, and they instinctively dispersed and avoided. After all, the rays of Voss's scepter are not weak. and they will shake the spirit body. But at this moment, a new magic array appeared in the path of the ray. Energy rays instantly penetrated and turned into countless bursting energy balls, like a storm roaring towards the god of the underworld and the others, flooding all space. Horus stepped forward, and the scepter that no longer output rays slammed into the air. Suddenly, the eagle-head eyes at the top of the scepter burst out with red light, and a huge protective shield spread outward. The rainstorm-like energy ball hitting it can only continuously stir up ripples, and cannot break through. Horus suddenly showed a sneer. At this moment, a huge crocodile mouth suddenly appeared behind Russell. It turned out that Ammit the Devourer had already left an illusion with the help of the god of the underworld Osiris, and sneaked past when he made his first strike. In the distance, the moon god Kong-Su did not remind him, but instead showed a sneer. Osiriston, who was looking at a dead man, felt that something was wrong, and immediately shouted, "Back off, Ammit." The corner of Russell's mouth grinned coldly. "It's late." In the next moment, the space where Russell was located appeared a mirror image reversal. Russell changed from facing the god of the underworld and others to facing back. He looked at Ammit, who showed a look of amazement in front of him, and raised his palm that was burning with flames. A flame chain appeared at an unknown time, and almost instantly wrapped around the decisive retreating Ammit. At this moment, Ammit, who is more than 3 meters tall, instinctively wants to burst out divine power, become larger, and break the flame chain. But in the next second, she was horrified to find that she couldn't grow bigger at all, and the divine power on her body became obscure and difficult to operate. "Hades, save me!" Ammit shouted out in horror. Osiris had already made a move, and his body suddenly turned into black mist, breaking through Horus's shield and shuttling through countless energy balls. But at this time, countless silver-white lightning storms fell, forcing him to stop. Ammit just saw this scene, and suddenly a pair of eyes were filled with great fear. At this moment, she instinctively wanted to drive her authority, but found that there was another force at the same position interfering. In the next second, she felt a huge force coming from the chain, and she was pulled closer to the other party without any resistance. Suddenly, she was attracted to the sight of a pair of flame eyes and looked straight over. "Accept the trial of the fire of vengeance, Ammit." Layers of voices from Russell sounded. This is the last voice Ammit hears on earth. The sin in her soul was ignited by the eye of judgment in an instant, turned into a terrible blazing flame and began to burn. The time scale of Ammit at this moment was lengthened, but in just a moment, it seemed that thousands of years had passed. Her soul was also burned by the flames for 1,000 years. At this moment, an indescribable scream sounded in the mirror space. Ammit's eyes erupted with countless flames of Mars, and then he tilted his head and completely lost his breath of life. In the distance, the moon god Kong-Su looked at this scene in shock, and felt an indescribable shock in his heart. Before this, he had thought about Ammit's many ways to die, but I never expected that the other party who was responsible for the soul of the judgment would finally die under the judgment. It's like a denial and teasing from fate. In the distance, the lightning storm and the rainstorm-like energy ball pouring have stopped. The eyes of Hades and Horus were full of anger and shock, and it seemed that they could not accept that Ammit died like this. At this moment, they saw Russell carrying Ammit's body and slowly turned his head, and slowly laughed. "Now it's 1-on-2. Episode 96. Russell released his palm, and as the flame chains disappeared, Ammit's body fell weakly downward. At this time, a green vortex suddenly appeared in midair, and after devouring the corpse, it disappeared again. The moon god Kong-Su, who saw this scene in the distance, trembled in his heart. He had thought that Russell, as the new supreme mage, was just trying to weaken the Age of God realm, but now he finds that he was so wrong. The other party is clearly a lion, while Hades and Horus are just prey that falls into a trap and is about to be eaten. Kong-Sunii was born with uncontrollable fear at this moment. He was afraid that Russell would throw himself into the dimension as nourishment, but now it is impossible to defect. First, Russell could have killed him first. Second, even if he wins, there is a high probability that the god of the underworld will not let him go. It is better to believe in the supreme mage. Thirdly, he hates, or rather hates, Osiris. That's the point. In the sky, Russell smiled with satisfaction after feeling the dimension begin to break down the power. Dimensional growth will feed back to the dimensional lord, who can already feel that his power is slowly increasing. The only pity is that Ammit has been sealed for too many years, and his divine power is too little, but that's just an appetizer. Russell looked at the god of the underworld with blazing eyes, and the meaning in his eyes was self-evident. This look completely irritated Osiris, who raised his hands and roared angrily, "I'll let you know what it costs me to provoke me, mortal." In an instant, the billowing black power of the underworld erupted from his body, spreading in all directions. Seeing this, Kong-Su, who was watching the battle, immediately withdrew farther, seemingly not daring to be contaminated with black fog at all. Still, he shouted to remind. This is the power of the mixture of the Osiris plant and the power of the underworld, which can make any life wither. Be careful not to touch it. Russell nodded, indicating that he understood. The next moment, he flew towards the sky rapidly, reaching a certain height, and then pressed down with one hand against the black fog rolling behind him. In an instant, a magic array with a diameter of tens of thousands of meters condensed into shape, and countless orange-red flames poured down. For a while, it was as if a huge sea of fire appeared in the sky and fell downward, roaring and devouring all the black fog. Above the sea of fire, Russell sneered, seemingly showing a proud look. But at this moment, the flames suddenly surged. The next moment, hundreds of tentacles condensed into entities penetrated the flames, flashing black and bright in the sunlight, overwhelmingly blocking all angles towards Russell. They are incredibly flexible and tough. Blazing flames, dazzling lightning, extremely cold ice guns, and bursting energy missiles kept appearing in Russell's hands. But these magic hits on it can only make the tentacles beat, and they cannot be damaged at all. Soon, the encirclement is getting smaller and smaller. Suddenly, a big hole broke open in the sea of fire below, and the energy rays of Voss's scepter penetrated out. Russell was able to dodge the attack, but at this time, several tentacles seized the opportunity to instantly entangle his body. The next moment, the black mist with the power of withering erupted and spread from all the tentacles again. Just a few seconds later, a huge black sun appeared in the sky, and a large number of golden symbols appeared on the surface. Hades and Horus walked through the dissipating sea of fire and looked at the scene in front of them with a sneer, because mortals wrapped in the sun are destined to turn into dry bones. After more than 10 seconds, Osiris shook his head in disappointment. It seems that it was a wrong decision to start letting the weak omit temptation. At this time, he could clearly perceive that there was no breath of life in the day of the underworld. Hearing this, Horus turned his head to look at Kong Su, who was hiding in the distance, and did not hide the malice in his eyes at all. The other party's authority has long been gluttonous, but at this time, he saw Kong Su pointing at him to the day of the underworld. Horus turned his head to look and found that the black sun, which had just been calm, suddenly trembled, and the next second a flame skeleton wearing a familiar battle suit walked out from inside. Seeing this scene, an incredible look appeared in the eyes of the god of Hades and Horus. I can't understand why the power from authority can't kill the other party. Russell slowly extinguished the flame, and flesh and blood were born again. He rubbed his face and sighed helplessly. I sold such a big flaw, and you just stood on the side and watched. Can you tell me why you are so confident? After transforming into an evil spirit knight, the so-called withering death power simply had no effect on him. He wanted to fish two people over and suddenly erupt, but the two men confidently left him speechless. Saying that, Russell sighed, and then while moving his hands and feet to warm up, he said, "In that case, I'm not lazy." Saying that, Russell turned his head and shouted at Kong Su, "You'd better back away and hurt me by mistake." When the latter heard it, he immediately flew farther in a hurry, for fear that he would be slaughtered and thrown into the dimension. And seeing Russell so arrogant, Horus couldn't bear it anymore. He let out a sharp scream. The golden divine power on his body burst out into a battle armor, golden wings opened behind his back, and the Voss scepter in his hand deformed and grew a sharp blade. The next moment, the sonic boom flashed away on him, and almost instantly crossed a distance of hundreds of meters to Russell, holding the scepter high and stabbing it. At this moment, Horus could even clearly see the smile at the corner of Russell's mouth, before he had time to react. But when he looked away, he found that the other party's gaze was looking at him. Horus was shocked, and the scepter in his hand had been stabbed out. But in the next moment, the figure in front of him had disappeared, and the attack fell into the air. How can it be? Horus stopped his body for a moment, but then a voice suddenly came from behind him. "Are you looking for me?" Suddenly, he felt a terrifying force brewing behind him that made his heart palpitate. Horus did not hesitate to open an object worn on his chest, with a ring on top and a cross below. The fetish named Anka instantly bloomed with golden light, instantly creating an area where time was slow. And in this area, Horus is not affected, but instead of reflexively attacking, he fluttered his wings and wanted to escape. One is that the time is very limited, and the second is that he already feels that the terrifying energy behind him has burst out. If you turn back, you will be hit. But at this moment, a green light emerged, and the time slowdown area suddenly disappeared. At the same time, the shadow of the judgment balance had already appeared in the eyes of the god of darkness in the distance. This is far more advanced and terrifying than what he gave Ammit. In an instant, the invisible power of judgment descended, wanting to suppress Russell. Ignorance. Dozens of silver-white magic arrays superimposed in circles suddenly appeared on Russell's body. The magic seal spell from Medivan was instantly reversed and used by him with the power of the origin, isolating all power except himself. The next moment, he carried the fist of thunder and fell on the back of Horus under the blessing of the power of the bull charm. Rumble. The transparent shockwave exploded instantly. Golden divine blood spewed out of Horus's mouth. The golden armor and wings were completely shattered, and cracks like porcelain shattering appeared on his body, and he was blasted away by a punch. And all this from the very beginning of Horus's attack, to the end when he was almost shattered by a punch, and not even half a second passed. Russell slowly withdrew his fist, his eyes contemptuous. What a weak god. Episode 97. In the extreme distance, the moon god Kong Su could still clearly see what was happening. At that moment, Russell almost resisted the judgment authority of the god of the underworld with crushing power, and severely damaged Horus. At this moment, he thought of a person. Supreme Mage, Duel. Back then, the other party also drove the gods back to the god realm in an almost crushing way, and completely disappeared on the bank of the Nile. I don't know if this time will be thousands of years. As one of the gods, Kong Su was also a little lost for a while. Rumble. Suddenly, a shocking thunder woke Kong Su. He looked into the distance and was even more frightened. I saw that the sky was already covered with dark clouds, and the thunder on Russell's body exuded terrible coercion, as if the god of thunder was alive. Kong Su seemed to feel a hint of impatience in Russell at this moment. Rumble. A silver-white lightning bolt fell from the clouds, as if it were an entity held by Russell in his hand, constantly twisting and exploding. Russell's eyes had turned into a silver-white energy form, staring at the gloomy-looking god Osiris. I only give you 10 seconds to summon your full power. Don't say I don't give a chance. It's not that Russell is arrogant, but the so-called Hades and Pharaoh Patronus are really too weak. That punch just now made him understand that the other party hadn't even touched the threshold of the Heavenly Father level. If he wanted to kill these two gods, he really couldn't even use 10 seconds. The opponent's so-called authority, although the power level is high in his eyes, its strength is too low. If it was just this level, Russell felt that GUI didn't need to remind him at all. For a while, as Russell's voice fell, the sky responded with thunder and lightning in an instant. Osiris, the god of the underworld, took off the pharaoh's crown on his head and looked at Russell, who was holding thunder, and his eyes showed indifference. Mortal, I will do as you wish, but as the price of your blasphemy, I will bury you at the bottom of the desert sea and freeze your soul forever. The next moment, Osiris was holding a crown in one hand and a scepter in the other, and uttered an obscure ancient language in his mouth. Suddenly, a billowing black divine power appeared in his eyes, exuding the void, and a huge door appeared in the sky behind him again. Wow. For a while, it seemed that the whimpering of countless dead began to reverberate. Wind. No, it was the origin power from the underworld that turned into a terrible storm at this moment. Crazy poured into Osiris's body. At this moment, his body began to grow wildly, and it did not stop growing until it was 10,000 meters tall, and Russell became as small as an ant. Seeing this scene, the moon god Kong Su shouted out in disbelief. Madman, you actually extracted the power of the origin of the underworld. Aren't you afraid to pull the gods to punish you? But at this time Osiris completely disdained Kong Su. He knelt down on one knee with a solemn expression, and the mountain was suddenly shaken. A huge balance appeared in front of him. Inside the two weighing pans, on one side are huge white feathers, and on the other side is Russell. He didn't know when he was taken into the tray by the judgment scales and pressed on it. Osiris showed a terrifying smile at this time. He didn't wait for the balance to make his own judgment, but suddenly stretched out his hand and pressed on the right side of the scale. I said, you are guilty. In an instant, an invisible force erupted from the scale of judgment and spread towards Russell. This is the real power of death. It is the mortal enemy of all life forces. It was as if Osiris had seen the moment when Russell's heart stopped beating. But at this moment, an extremely striking white silk thread suddenly flickered. In the next second, Kong Su's entire body began to tremble. The god of the underworld Osiris also let out a deafening roar. Nope, what did you do to it? I saw that the ultimate artifact that represented the underworld and the judgment balance was actually broken into two sections from the middle at this time. The scale of judgment is the first and last time that both sides fall down at the same time. At this moment, the truth is completely revealed. The 10th order magic from the Bone King that can cut off space is now broken, showing terrifying power under the blessing of the power of the Heavenly Father. The white line just now is not a line at all, but a manifestation of the space being broken. Russell no longer suppressed his strength, and the power belonging to the level of the Heavenly Father made the entire mirror space begin to tremble. Osiris, you don't know anything about true power. Silence here, little god. Although his body is small, his voice is like heavenly power at this time. In an instant, tens of thousands of silver lightning bolts tens of meters thick appeared in the black clouds, falling like a storm. The ground was even more exaggerated, and an endless huge, purple magic array appeared. The mysteries of the frost reveal an icy blue airflow. The true meaning of the flame condenses into an orange-red storm. The blazing heat and ice cold do not interfere with each other under unimaginable control, forming a terrifying tornado that wraps the 10,000-meter Osiris. Rumble. The space trembled violently. Osiris roared and resisted, and a massive black mist erupted from his body and began to fight. But then a deafening roar appeared. In the next second, dozens of huge thunder dragon heads popped out of the clouds, swimming thousands of meters of body wrapped around Osiris's body and constantly tearing and biting. Nope, your soul is so young. How can you have the strength of the Heavenly Father? You and me. At this moment, Osiris's voice was full of fear. He could never have imagined that his enemies would be so powerful. You must know that he only has this power when he is in the underworld. No, I can't die. I'm going back. As long as I return to the god realm, no one can kill me. At this moment, he didn't care about Horus's life or death, and instinctively wanted to pry the gate of the god realm to return. But immediately he was horrified to find that the connection was broken. The strength of this space became stronger at some point, so that he could not perceive the location of the god realm at all. And as the thunder roared, he felt more and more severe pain, and the smell of death gradually became clear. Osiris couldn't help but think of the fear that had been dominated by the Ancient One again. And this time it's even scarier, because as the Lord of the Underworld, he is going to die. And at this moment, there was a sound of cracking in the space, and a trace of extra sunlight shone in. "Are God save me." Osiriston was surprised to cry out, "No one can save you." Russell suddenly snorted coldly, and all the magic in his body was mobilized. In an instant, the mirror space began to collapse rapidly. Under the layers of chaos, everything becomes grotesque, as if trapped in a mirror maze. After the power of the sun god shattered a layer of space, there were countless identical scenes on the opposite side, and it was impossible to determine which one was real. At this moment, countless Russell appeared on all the mirrors. I saw him raise the wand that appeared in his hand at an unknown time and wave it forward vigorously. Suddenly, a bucket thick, almost condensed into solid green energy lightning burst out, continuously submerged into the storm. In an instant, the god of the underworld Osiris let out a terrified scream. He found that a huge and terrifying death force began to frantically erode his divine body and silence his soul. The sun god seemed to have sensed everything at this time, and suddenly burst out more light. But at this time, Russell's icy voice echoed throughout the space. "It's late, his life is for me." The next moment, the constantly agitating Adavaso fate curse burst out with a dazzling green light that instantly flooded all the mirrors, and no one else could be seen. After a few seconds, everything dimmed, and the collapsed mirror space had returned to normal. The huge gate of the divine realm in the sky towered, and the old god who was standing at the door looked down with bleak eyes. There, at Russell's feet, is the body of Osiris, the ashen-skinned god of the underworld. One of them is small, the other is huge. One standing, one falling. Episode 98. Poof. Luna Kong Su screamed from the air and fell to the ground. The terrifying spatial chaos just now, as well as the light with the smell of death, made his heart tremble, and he had the feeling that he would die at any time. At this time, although he fell heavily on the ground, he finally had a sense of peace of mind. He instinctively remembered Russell's words before telling him to stay away, otherwise he would be injured by mistake. "It's just too much. Isn't this a cheap bird? How far is this useful?" The horrible scene just now. There is no place to hide. However, he only dared to complain in his heart, saying that it was impossible to say, impossible in this life. Shaking his dizzy head, Kongsu looked up, wanting to see how Osiris was at the center of the storm. In an instant, the distant picture made him feel a cool breath rushing down the tail vertebrae straight to his brain. He clearly saw that Osiris, the god of the underworld, had died completely, trampled under Russell's feet. In the sky, the sun god Ra stood inside the gate of the divine realm. Although the latter is condescending, it clearly does not mean anything. On the contrary, he saw Russell's expression at this time with a look of eagerness, as if he wanted to break in. Kongsu felt a burst of fear in his heart. He didn't know if the other party was crazy, or if he was crazy, or maybe the world is crazy. The next second, something even more incredible happened to him. The body of the sun god Ra, the lord of the gods, seemed to become more dignified, and after a long sigh, he said, "I signed a contract with Gui more than 3,000 years ago. As long as the gods reside in the Heliopolis god realm, then Karma Taj can't do it. And although you are very powerful, you may not be able to win a war in the god realm. So stop here, new supreme mage." The sun god relented. At this moment, Kongsu's head almost fell off in surprise. Russell sighed in disappointment. He actually just wanted to stimulate the sun god in front of him to come out. Because he entered the area god realm dimension, it was basically impossible for him to win. First, there are too many gods inside. Second, there are still many good gods in the Azza god lineage, and he is not a devil, and he will do anything for the sake of profit. Third, it is because under the blessing of the dimension, the strength of these gods will increase greatly. In particular, the sun god Ra is likely to be at the apex of the Heavenly Father level, and the god of the sky, the god of the earth, should also be at the level of the Heavenly Father. Of course, even if he goes in, he can retreat with his whole body. The time gem and the space gem are all in his place. He never used them before, but because he couldn't use them most of the time. The side effects of time gems are needless to say, but they are undoubtedly powerful. Although the space gem is also a little chicken in his hands, it is a top artifact in terms of escape. Seeing that the sun god had no intention of fighting, Russell also took his thoughts. But there are still necessary warnings. Russell took a step forward, and in an instant the space displacement came to the front of the gate of the god realm, looking at the sun god at eye level. "From today onwards, your 9-pillar god's secret human agents will not be allowed to operate in the human world except for the god of harvest, the god of the sky, and the god of the earth. Otherwise, I would see it as a provocation to Karma Taj. You should understand that I can go to your dimension and make a big fuss and leave safely. The sun god Law did not have the slightest look of anger on his face. He knew that what the other party said was true. I can say yes, but I also have a request. I hope to take back the power of judgment in Osiris, which the underworld needs to judge the fate of souls. As if afraid that Russell would not agree, he continued. Of course, I will exchange the equivalent origin power for it, and I won't let you suffer. Russell is okay with that. That judgment authority was of little use to him. Not only did it duplicate the ability of the Eye of Judgment, but it would not help the growth of the dimension. It's best to exchange the power of the origin. The sun god Ra saw Russell nodding and sighed with relief in his heart. He raised his palm, and suddenly a dazzling light erupted from inside the gate and fell into it, turning into a miniature sun. In order to show his sincerity, the sun god first handed over the energy, and then reached out and clawed the corpse of the god of the underworld. Without Russell blocking it, a ray of light suddenly shone on it, and then pulled out a balanced shadow and fell into the hands of the sun god. By the way, there is another Horus who is not dead yet. Do you want it? Saying that, Russell grabbed behind him and suddenly grabbed a half-dead eagle from the void. In the next second, he carried the eagle leg and shook it vigorously. Look, it's really alive. At this time, Horus's eyes were full of horror, and he fluttered his wings in cooperation. He had just seen everything in his eyes, and at this time, he did not dare to resist at all, for fear of being killed in a second. And the main thing is that he also wants to save himself. As for avenging my father, is it still too late to break off relations? The sun god sighed as he looked into Horus' expectant eyes. He had just pretended not to find out because Horus's authority did not matter at all. But at this time, when it came to the surface, it was not easy for him to refuse. This is not worth anything, the sun god said sullenly, not wanting to suffer too much. Hearing this, Horus's wings suddenly drooped, and he felt a little unlovable. Russell shook 2 more times. Alive, this one is alive. He clearly meant that it was impossible to reduce the price or something. For the authority of your Lord of the Gods, it is impossible to see death without salvation. The sun god glanced at Kong Su, who was secretly watching in the distance, and sighed helplessly. If only there were no audiences. No way. The sun god extracted another part of the energy from the divine realm dimension and handed it over, and then grabbed Horus's wings and closed the door without looking back. He was afraid that if he stayed for a while, the other party would grab Kong Su's bird head and ask if you wanted this bird. Come back when you have time. Russell greeted the void enthusiastically, and then threw the 2 compressed origin forces and the corpse of the Hades Oluses into the dimension. And not only that, the Anka artifact on Horus's body was also detained by him. I have to say that this time I really made a lot of money. After devouring these energies, his dimension had completely increased by 1/10 of its original size. This is equivalent to giving him feedback that will also be 1/10 of his current strength. Not to mention that there are 2,800 exchange points credited this time. Sure enough, slowly cultivating something did not come quickly at all. It's a pity that too few come out. No, forget that there is another one here. Russell was in front of Kong Su for a moment, with a smile on his face. Kong Su's heart trembled, and he instantly had the idea of escaping. But thinking that it was useless to escape anywhere, he still endured it, and his scalp was numb. The Supreme Mage's words count. You can't do anything to me. Don't worry, I will definitely continue to protect the Nocturnal. Seeing such a prodded Kong Su, Russell no longer scared. The bird laughed all of a sudden, and then patted the other party's shoulder in a friendly way. You're so weak. Of course it's okay. You are so weak. So weak. Weak. Kong Su froze in place all of a sudden, as if he had been hit by magic. Episode 99. In fact, according to Russell's original idea, only let Mark, the agent of the moon god Kong Su, stay in the world, and let Kong Su also return to the god world. However, after obtaining the scarab and the artifact Anka, he changed his mind. Both of these items carry the same breath of time power, obviously hiding some secrets. Maybe in the future, he won't really want to go to the Espo god realm, and Kong Su, who hates the gods and whose power is sealed in the god realm, will be a good leader. After bidding farewell to Kong Su, Russell enters his own dimension. The corpses of the 2 gods in the sky, as well as the origin power exchanged with the sun god, are constantly being decomposed, and they are constantly seeping into the void. Russell can clearly feel that the whole dimension is slowly continuing to expand, and feedback himself. Osiris, the god of the underworld, Ammit the Devourer. If I'm not mistaken, these 2 are gods of the Aryu lineage. How did I provoke you? Died so miserably. Hela came over and asked with interest. Russell shrugged. I thought that Gui could come out and take advantage when he died, and then it became cheap. Saying that, Russell patted his head, as if remembering something. By the way, I'm going to take you back to Asgard in the near future. How do you think? Now that the relationship has been confirmed, you can't just pretend to be deaf and dumb like this. And he has considerations. Hela was not very excited, but glanced at it charmingly. Why, you're not afraid that I'll fight with that old guy? Russell crossed Hela Road. After all, you are father and daughter. It is not good to continue the stalemate. Of course, this mainly depends on your will. I will not interfere too much. The main purpose of this return is to untie your connection with Asgard. Hela's power originates from Asgard, and only there will the power recover at its strongest. And once you leave, it will weaken. This is a big hidden danger. It's better to completely break off the connection, and then make a magic mark for the other party and become your own subordinate. Of course, he wouldn't carve into his soul like Sid Horn. Hela is a smart person and suddenly thinks of something. She didn't want to make that little girly gesture, but her eyes were still slightly red. You want to let me go? Sealed for almost 2,000 years, how she did not desire freedom. But her self-esteem prevented her from saying to Russell to let me go, and she would rather go on like that. And hearing Hela's words, Russell said with a little smile, "What are you talking about? Of course I will let you go. You are my woman, not my vassal. The man in your life can only be me, but I can't be all your life." Listening to this domineering words, Hela was hit directly in the heart and almost cried. That feeling of soul tremor was unprecedented. Russell did not laugh at the queen's tears about to fall, but hugged the other party's waist harder. "But don't think about running away, you'll be back every 10 days or so." Hela snorted, but had no intention of objecting. However, after a few seconds, he felt that something was not in line with his temperament, and he still pretended to be tough and replied, "You don't always see me, why come back, eh? Although the old husband and wife are old, but I will be embarrassed if you say it so bluntly. Oh, I don't know who the defeated subordinates are. Daring, last time I obviously won. Bah, I used to call me Lord Queen, but now I don't admit it." Saying that, the two of them hit the castle from the outside, and the move was deadly and very intense. "Demon girl, next time I will tell you to admit defeat." Russell turned pale and once again hid in Nick Fury's office. At this moment, only by drinking hot water here can you feel a touch of warmth in this cold and boring world. However, thinking back to Hela's words just after the battle, Russell was still a little moved. In addition to asking him to put the magic mark stronger in the depths of his soul, the other party also had to leave the 9 realms. However, she is not going to travel, but to be Russell's pioneer beyond the 9 realms. Although Russell is a little worried, he thinks that the other party cannot return to the dimension after becoming his subordinate, but there should be no problem. And the 9 realms are indeed too small, and he will also go out in the future. Especially if you spread your own transformation magic, you need to do so. After resting for a moment to regain his spirits, Russell released a small enchantment. Before the death of the 2 gods of the underworld, there were more than 3,000 exchange points brought to him, which could improve the simulation degree of the Bone King a lot. Originally, he thought that killing these 2 gods would have at least tens of thousands of incomes. But now it seems that even the participation of the 2 gods in the original timeline is not high, just a small plot. 10 minutes passed. The simulation of the Bone King character card has reached 39%. The first is the physical fitness of the opponent's necromancy skeleton, which makes Russell's bones tougher. Secondly, the origin power from the breath of necromancy has also gained a lot. Then there's 37% magic. Finally, there are hundreds of magic. Black hole. Message. Freely. See-through. Unyielding. Dragon power. Gravity vortex. Enchant humans. Negative burst. Boost induction. Booster magic. Infinite barriers. Advanced hardening. Real darkness. Cloak of chaos. Rib restraint. Advanced lucky, and more. It is worth mentioning that this time Russell also drew a super level magic Skyfall. This is a huge range of wide area destruction magic. It will hit the hot gas generated by the ultra high heat source from top to bottom, burning everything in the effect range, and has additional damage that can inflict huge damage on the undead. Russell went on a trip to the desert. Just after normal test use, the sand can be completely melted, forming a hole full of boiling magma in the ground. After experimenting with magic, Russell went to see the dog Thor, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Loki, and the white cat Natasha. After discovering that the 3 animals were still fighting their wits and bravery, they left it alone. It looks like it will take a while to divide the winner and loser. After a few more days, Russell looked at the slow increase in exchange points and finally made a decision. With his current strength, there should be no problem going to DC. It is better to go over there for a while to see if he can get more exchange points. And there is a lot of magic on the DC side. You can touch the bypass to see if you can transform the spell earlier. After making sure, Russell took Hela back to Asgard. The father and daughter didn't fight hard, but Hela pointed to the roof of the fairy palace hall and said a few sarcastic words, but Odin didn't bother to return the favor. Still, Russell and Odin talked very well. Even this father-in-law will be embarrassed to call for a while. And of course Odin is not embarrassed to say. Odin then mobilizes the power of the World Tree to make Hela disconnect from Asgard. After some things were dealt with, Russell rested for a few more days, but when he was at his best, he turned on the talent of piercing. A few seconds later, Russell stood on the road looking at the world in front of him and felt like he wanted to curse. He didn't know which city on Earth it was, but at this time it has been completely destroyed. There are ruins everywhere, and the flames are bursting into the sky, which is a complete apocalyptic scene. At this time, a huge spaceship flew high in the sky with billowing black smoke. At this moment, looking at the large number of demons with transparent wings flying out of it, Russell finally couldn't help but scold. Shall I him? Doomsday Line, Episode 100. As a comic book lover, Russell certainly knows what the end of the world is like. This is the scariest timeline since the Justice League defeated Steppenwolf. Lois is killed, Superman is controlled by Darkseid with anti-life equations in despair, and the Earth falls. In the end, only Batman, the Flash, Steelbone and others are still struggling to hold on in this world. But what gives Russell a headache is not blackened Superman at all, but Dark Monarch Darkseid, not to mention that the other party itself is very powerful. What's more critical is that he doesn't know how far the other party has mastered the anti-life equation, if in full control and still on Earth. That Russell didn't think about it, and went straight back to Marvel after hiding for a month. Because that kind of power is definitely reaching the limit of the single universe, even the multiverse. However, he guessed that Darkseid should not be on Earth for now, leaving Superman to rule. And the anti-life equation should be just fragments, not everything. Otherwise, Batman and the others won't have any chance. But even then, Russell doesn't like the current point in time. In this case, it is too difficult to change the plot, too dangerous, and the maneuverable space is very low. Sure enough, it still depends on the Flash to sacrifice the sky. Silently complaining, Russell disappeared when the sky was surrounded by demons. Inside an abandoned subway tunnel, a dozen stalls are scattered together. Because Darkseid did not kill everything, but wanted the remaining life to feel despair and fear, little by little transformed into his own army of demons. So there are some in places like this, and there are some in various cities. Dude, what quality do you want this year? Some of them are good. Maybe tomorrow the group of bitches will find out here, and you won't even buy a cigarette but, also, well, do you have any leaves? Give me a little more. That's not the price. Price is not a problem. At this time, a decadent man in a yellow trench coat was whispering a deal with a bearded man. The former took out a bottle of rum and a piece of gold. The latter's eyes immediately lit up, and he handed over a box of cigarettes mixed with various brands, as well as several hand-wrapped cigarette rolls. And at this moment, an exclamation sounded behind the decadent man. Trade with water soaked in azalea roots and gold turned into ashes, and you really have your Constantine. Hearing this, the faces of the two people who were trading changed. The cigarette seller snatched back the wine bottle and gold, snatched back his own things, and then said viciously, "Disgusting liar, get out." Saying that the man also showed the gun on his waist, the threat is self-evident. And seeing that the things in his hand were gone, Constantine suddenly turned his head in annoyance, wanting to see who had ruined his own good deeds. But as soon as he turned back, he almost instinctively wow. If nothing else, the other party is wearing too clean. The smell on the body did not stink like the survivors, but there was a scent of shower gel after bathing. These are rare items these days. And this person can see through his magic at a glance and call his own name. Within 0.01 seconds, Constantine showed a particularly friendly smile. Then with a clang in his hand, the gold burst out countless sparks to disturb the vision, and at the same time pull out his legs and run. Dry. He is obviously very careful. How can there be enemies to find him? As for why you don't know who the other person is? No way, there are too many pits. How could he possibly remember so many scammers? After running all the way into deeper darkness, Constantine did not hesitate to chant spells and cast magic. The next moment, a wooden gate appeared. Constantine hurriedly pushed the door and ran in, then closed the door hard. After doing this step, he let out a long sigh of relief. Really, with Superman blackening for 2.5 years, these days are really getting sad and sad. Most of San Antonio's trading points were scammed by him. Originally, he was not recognized today, and he was still beautiful. Who would have thought that in the end it would still be stirred? Bah. Constantine walked over to the large table in the middle of the room and sat down, poured out the bottom of a bottle of whiskey, and then mixed some water and suffocated. If he doesn't cheat something, he will run out of food. For a while, Constantine began to think about whether to change cities to deceive. Toot toot. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Constantine suddenly stood up in horror and took a few steps back, his whole body muscles tensed, staring at the wooden door deadly. His mysterious house is built in the spirit prison. How can there be creatures to find themselves? Not even angels and demons. So for him, the scene in front of him at this time is no less terrifying than ordinary people knocking on the door by ghosts. Just then came the voice of talking outside the door. Open the door. Open the door. Don't hide inside. I know you're home. In an instant, Constantine's face changed greatly. He had already heard that this person was the same person he had just met in the subway tunnel. Constantine felt a tingling in his scalp at this moment, and the cold sweat on his back instantly wet the inner lining. He plans to play dead without making a sound. This kind of big guy who can chase over, think with his toes, and know that he is definitely not an opponent. However, the mystery house cannot be opened from the outside without his permission. Therefore, the only thing he is worried about now is that if the other party does not leave, what will he do? In 7 or 8 days, he will starve to death. For a while, Constantine was considering whether to lure some hellish creatures over. Bang bang, the knock on the door outside began to gradually become irritable. It seems that there is some dissatisfaction that Constantine did not open the door. Until a few more minutes later, the knocking stopped abruptly, finally gone. Constantine, who was already wet with cold sweat, sat back in his chair and swallowed his saliva fiercely. But the next second, click, the sound of the door lock being opened sounded instantly. Constantine jumped up in horror, and a heart beat wildly, looking at the wooden door in disbelief. Absolutely impossible. Illusion, it must be illusion. I may still be in the tunnel. But no matter how Constantine used the spell to lift the illusion, the wooden door gradually opened not far away. The next moment, he saw that familiar face walk in, staring at himself with a malicious smile and saying, "You say if I send you to hell, will God send me to heaven?" Constantine's face suddenly turned pale. What a hell joke this is, it's really not funny at all.